Whenever I picture my father, even now, when he is 70 years of age, I see him as part of the Gander River landscape. It's true that he's traveled about and done many things. Still, he's spent most of his life on this river. It seems to be his natural setting. Of course, he's not so involved with the river now as he used to be. He retired from the tourist business several years ago. Retiring from business is fairly easy, but how do you retire from a river? So, whenever I picture my father, I see him somewhere on the Gander, in his boat.
In those earlier days, in the 30s, when there was much to do, I went up and built a camp up there on the northwest Gander. I went up one fall just to can rabbits only, because there was nothing else you could make $1 at. We were getting $25 a case for rabbits at that time, and I went up there in November, 29th of November. I didn't come back anymore till the 16th day of March, all alone, all winter. And I never felt lonely. And I suppose I've spent many a week out in the woods alone, winter and summer. Those days we didn't use a sleeping bag either. Make a bed in the snow and sleep outdoors. I've done that for most of one winter.
As a boy, I naturally wanted to be a trapper and a riverman like my father. Instead of playing baseball or hockey, we kids spent most of our spare time fooling around with boats and guns, or tramping around the woods, snaring rabbits and trying to trap muskrat and weasel. My earliest memories are full of wonderful stories my father and his cronies would tell about birds, caribou, and the like. So now, whenever I get a chance, I like to come back to the river. I bring my kids to the river as well, so it can be part of their experience too. Strange, you know, the charm of the homemade Gander River boats. They lack the elegance of your cedar canoe. They are heavy. You can't heave one on your back and walk off with it. Yet the boat is perfectly designed for this river.
The earlier boats, of course, we used for poling, they were shorter, but when the motors came about, we had to have a larger boat. And we wanted a larger boat because most of us in that area made our living that way, by bringing freight and carrying passengers, and the more you carried, the more you could make better day's pay. So then we started building them longer. We got up to 20 feet, and then we got to 22 feet, and finally we got to 24, and that's just about the longest boat you'll find. They average around 23 feet, I think, today, and 42 inches wide, 45 inches wide, and about 18 inches deep. A boat that can carry 1,500 pounds. And they have a spruce keel and spruce stem and stern, and an 8-inch counter for to mount the motor on the stern. And the ribs are tamarack, and they use that type because it doesn't break if you strike a rock, it just bends. And the plank is balsam fir, and the gunwale is spruce. They're good rough water boats. You can go when it's pretty stormy. I went in the river when it's been blowing 50 miles an hour, and you can still get in. You know, we'd never do it with any other type boat.
One of the things that struck me the first time I came back to the river, after being away a few years, was how small everything looked. I mean, when we were kids, we thought the Gander River must have been at least as big as the Amazon. But actually, it's only about 100 miles long. When I discovered that, it was a bit of a letdown. And it's not very wild, except in a few places, or when it's high, like in the spring. The trick is in knowing where the rocks are. A man who doesn't know the channels and how they change, in different seasons will damage his boat and motor, lose valuable time, and if he's careless, end up drowned. That has happened to some rivermen. Running the river looks deceptively easy, but it takes years of experience in all kinds of weather. That's why, when we were kids, our highest ambition in life was not to get a college degree, or even to be graduated from high school, but to be able to navigate this river like the best of the rivermen. Dad traveled a lot, especially when he was a young man. I guess most island people do. He's worked in the States and in Canada. He spent one winter trapping in northern Ontario. But his first trip abroad was to New York.
Well, at that time, some of my friends went away to New York, and New York and Boston was the place to go at that time, not Toronto. And a bunch of us, we'd get together and decide we'd go to New York. We went there about Christmas time, 1926. And I got a job driving the streetcars on 6th Avenue, 4th to 59th Street. And I distinctly remember I was at 33rd Street in Pennsylvania Station when Lindbergh landed in Paris. I saw the newsboys on the street hollering, "Lindy landed in Paris."
But my father could never stay on the road for very long. He always came back. The river was his highway.
Yes, the river was the highway. The only way we could get to connect with the train was to go by boat to Glenwood. And then the steamers that brought our supplies, they finished in December, and usually by May, before the steamers ran again to bring freight, supplies would be getting low. And then everything had to be brought out to Gander River. The deep freeze was one of the most awkward things I think I brought down, because it was high in the boat and she wasn't quite stable. You had to be very careful. But we got it down. I couldn't sit down as you normally do on your seat because you couldn't see where your boat was going. I had to stand up the whole way down to watch for the rocks and steer the boat and things like that. And one trip I was taking in 3 fishermen. They were going in looking for work on the Pulpwood Drive. And halfway up one of the lakes, the lake was 4 miles long, this fellow asked me for a drink. Of course, it's all fresh water. And I told him, yes, when we get up here away now, there's a little brook up here, and we'll go ashore and I'll get you a drink. And we'll boil the kettle. So when we got up there, I landed just above the brook. He said, "Skipper," he said, "where's the brook?" I said, "Just down around shore there." I said, 100 yards or so. And I said, "Bring back a kettle of water, too, after you have your drink, because we're going to have a lunch here." All the time we were passing through fresh water for miles. But he was a saltwater fisherman. He didn't realize the water was fresh.
Freighting, carrying passengers, guiding fishermen. There was always a way to make $1 on the Gander River. Once, when a hurricane airplane crashed, Dad made $300.
The hurricane plane crashed on the Gander River 15 miles from Gander Bay on a bog there, and the Air Force sent in some men to take the plane apart and bring it out to the shores of the river, and I contracted to bring it out from Third Pond to Gander Bay and crate it and put it aboard the steamer. We lashed 2 canoes together. They were 21 feet long, and lashed them together, and I had 2 men, 2 outboard motors, 1 on each, and I put a tarpaulin between the 2 boats to keep the water from coming in the boat. And I got in the cockpit and gave directions to the 2 boys with the motors to steer the boat, and just gave them hand directions, and we made the 2 trips in the one day. So I crated the plane and shipped it on board the steamer to Lewisport.
In 1951, Dad and his brother decided to open hunting and fishing camps. People came from all over the States and Canada. They took them moose hunting along the Gander and caribou hunting inland on the barren grounds at the headwaters of the Gander. Dad's knowledge of wild animals and their ways comes straight from the Micmac Indians, especially old Jim John, who took him on his first trip to caribou country when he was just a boy. The Gander was one of the best salmon rivers in the land, so Dad and his brother operated fishing camps too. But soon other camps appeared, and the traffic of hunters and fishermen increased. The wilderness was not as wild anymore. New bridges spanned the Gander. A road now skirted its banks. The river was no longer the highway. As a landscape painter, I must confess that I used to find the backcountry more attractive than the river itself. The river seemed too pretty. The bogs and barrens seemed to display more character and strength. But as I get older, I begin to see more of the details of the river landscape. Things my father had been seeing from his canoe all along, I suppose.
This is where the salmon comes up this river, you know, to spawn. They go up 80 and 90 miles to spawn on the river.
Did you ever catch one?
Oh, yes, I've caught a lot of salmon.
How big was the biggest one you ever caught?
14 pounds, the largest one I ever caught.
Wow.
And they go in on those little brooks, you know, the streams coming into the river, they go in there to spawn. And they lay their eggs on the little sandy bottom there in October. And then the fry hatch out in the spring, you know, and then they come out as little par, we call them. And you get caribou used to be here too at one time.
They swim in the water?
Pardon?
They swim in the water?
Oh, yes, they can swim well, very well. And they don't sink in the water. When they're swimming, their side is half out of the water, you know. The caribou hair is a little hollow shell inside which floats them up and keeps them high. And they can swim real fast. A moose swimming in the water is only just his neck out. He's right down underneath.
You ever see a moose swimming?
Oh, yes. I've had a moose between my boats. I've held on a moose's antlers when I've been steaming in the lake here, you know, holding on one side with the motor going. But there are no caribou around this area now.
Why not?
Well, I guess they've been killed off and civilization has driven them away. A few years ago, they put a road right down through this country here. And they've killed off all the moose and no caribou. Caribou won't stay around civilization where people are, but moose will. Moose will thrive around civilization. But the caribou is a secretive animal. He likes to be away where there's no humans.
I guess every generation starts out wanting to do what their parents did. Then they find that things have changed and that a new thing has to be done in a new way. Each generation has its own peculiar lore, too. My father looks at rocks in one way, and I look at them in another.
This is very fine. That was hardened way down into the earth, slowly, you know. And this came more to the surface and hardened kind of quickly. That's why it's got crystals in it, large crystals. And here's where, you know, sedimentary rocks, sediment, like they lay down in layers. And you can see where quartz came, melted quartz came and squeezed in between the layers. And like this piece, you know, you can see where the layers go together. And there are more layers all through because it's just gradually laid down underwater. And then this one, it's just sort of like a pudding, you know? with, like you have a batter, and you have raisins and stuff in it. Well, there's a batter of sort of lava with chunks of little rocks like these, you know, all mixed through it. It's a conglomeration of different kinds of rocks, so you call it conglomerate.
Well, this is what you do, Matthew, when you're building a wigwam. Put your sticks up here. This is like the Indians used to use, you know.
They live right here.
What?
They live right here.
Oh, they used to live here on Gander River at one time, sure, to be Athic Indians.
What kind were they?
Well, they were what they call the Red Indians. They used to paint their bodies with red ochre. That's why they call them Red Indians. Well, they had nothing else to build a home with, did they? They could get all this in the woods, eh? The birch bark to go around it. Like this. The birch bark around it. And you just put your finger there for a moment.
You ever live in one of these?
Yes, I've lived in wigwams, built them and lived in them when I was trapping. And lived in them summer and winter. You get the smell of wood smoke. You're making a little wood fire in your birch fire so you have no sparks. And they have a stick hung up here, one like this, tied on up on top here, and it'll come down and hang over your fire to hang your kettle on. And this is, you know, you put your boughs in here
For the floor?
to sleep on. I suppose the Indians had a caribou skin, something to sleep on. And this would be your door you stick up here. Put a piece of birch bark between the door to keep the wind from blowing in there, keep the cold out. Stick up your door this way. And I used to live in them myself, build them myself, and live in them myself.
Only be a little better than this one.
Oh, yes, a little better than that, larger than that. About 6 to 8 feet long, 7 feet high. Put in 2 piles of wood on each side, cook your supper there, and sleep comfortable.
What about these sticks around here? Shouldn't they be covered or something?
No, well, we'd cover this with moss. We had moss for to keep, you know, the draft out around here and before the snow came. That's all. You just put something around it just the same as you could do it like this, you see. You can do that with moss all around, you know, and it would keep your cold out, frost out.
What do you use there instead of string? Rope?
We use roots, spruce roots you get in the woods, you know, take them up from the roots of the tree. You can use them just the same as rope. Now, if we had a match and a bit of wood, we could light a fire, eh? All ready for the night.
A lot of the interior now has changed over the years since you trapped. It's been flooding and some of the rivers have changed, roads have come in. I suppose the Gander hasn't changed all that much. At least it looks good. There's not much, there's no pollution to speak of.
The lower Gander has changed to the extent that there's 5 times as much traffic on the river now as there was then, before motors came about. There wasn't that many people. It was only just it was a road to the railway. The only thing we had to get to the train if you wanted to get out of Gander Bay, where we lived. There was no other way, only just go by boat in the summer or travel overland in the winter. So this was our highway. And there weren't as many people using it as it is now, with fishing camps on the river and sportsmen coming down and a road out to the river and all this sort of thing.
I suppose the river doesn't mean as much to you now, does it?
No, I don't spend as much time on it now. There's too many people on it. I'd rather see it as it was years ago.
Sometimes, thinking of my father and the river, I get the feeling that my generation has really missed out. That for all our advantages of media and communication, we are still in many ways illiterate. We do a vast amount of travel, both in body and spirit, yet we don't get on intimate terms with our home grounds. Certainly not the kind of intimacy that comes from spending a lifetime on one piece of geography, getting to know it inside out, and getting to know ourselves in the bargain. I sometimes ask myself, which is better, to know a little about Picasso and the craters on the moon, or to know your own home landscape, like the back of your hand.
This is one of the favorite favorite crossing places in the fall, right where you can see right there now up the river. I've seen hundreds and hundreds crossing there when in the fall, you know, when you actually get the first snowfall, when they begin to migrate south. I've seen them walking across there by the hundreds all day long. But you don't see any now, I don't think. Well, that's a link house there, what we use for trapping link. You build up a little house about 3 feet high and 3.5 feet long, narrow it up in the center and the door, and put a bit of baiting on the back, and you set your trap or snare, either one, right out in the front part.
The details of how to set a link snare are important to Dad. At least they were. Not so long ago, even in my time, his success or failure as a trapper meant a lot to him and to his family. It meant money, it meant food, but even more than that, it meant independence. It's been a long while now since Dad needed to trap. He's made his name as a guide and an outfitter. But when you spend a lifetime making a living from the forests and river and barrens, you get so close to it you can't let go. And I suppose you shouldn't let go either. Dad knows the wilderness. He knows it well. It's familiar and real. It seems to me that the closer we get to real things, the closer we get to the truth about ourselves and about our place in the landscape. There seems to be a great yearning nowadays to pick up the threads we lost back there somewhere in the Industrial Revolution.
When we came here, for first time ever I came here, this is where we built our wigwam, right here. With me and my uncle. And we just cleared away the ground here and cut our sticks, the forks, and rind the birch bark, and built our wigwam here. And we used that for 4 or 5 years before we got to build a log cabin. The one we built first, that's all gone, and you can't even see the remains of it. But the second one is still there, but it's fallen in now, the roof's fallen in. The spring before last I was here, and that was in good shape. In fact, I stayed in it there one night. And now it's all fallen in. Everything's got to go after a while.
Of course, we can't go home again. We can't go back and live in the wilderness like my father and his breed did. For one thing, there are too many of us now. For another, they did it because they had to. There was no other way. No doubt they even complained a little, just like we do. But we can learn a few things from them. We can stop treating the land as if it were an enemy to be destroyed. We can learn to trust nature a lot more and to work with her rather than against her. And above all, we can learn a little humility.